Have you ever been forced into a marriage you didn't want, only to discover a love you never expected? This is a story of a powerful CO, cold, controlled, and bound by family pressure, and a gentle woman he barely knew. They said vows with empty hearts. But what happened on the wedding night changed everything. Secrets were uncovered, walls began to fall, and a love story neither of them saw coming quietly began. The wind howled outside the towering Langston estate, rattling windows like an omen. Inside, the grand chandelier glistened above a crowd dressed in opulence. Laughter echoed off the marble walls. Champagne glasses clinked, and violins filled the air with hauntingly beautiful notes. But in the midst of all this celebration stood one man, stiff, somber, and suffocating behind a carefully tailored tuxedo. Ethan Hale Langston, 32, billionaire CEO of Langston Tech, known for brilliance, cold decisions, an empire built from sweat and silence. And tonight, he was getting married to a stranger. His eyes scanned the ballroom, not in search of love, but for an escape route. His jaw clenched with every congratulatory pat on the back, every reminder that this union was a merger more than a marriage. In another corner of the room, the bride sat silently, hands trembling in her lap beneath the veil. Her name was Clara Monroe, 26, an orphan raised by her grandmother in a quiet village before a cruel twist of fate brought her to the attention of the Langstons. She didn't wear a designer smile. She didn't sparkle with social ambition. She looked like she'd rather disappear than walk down the aisle. But she had no choice. Just like Ethan, the deal had been made. Her grandmother's failing health and mounting hospital bills had trapped Clara into accepting a proposal that came with a mansion but without affection. Ethan's dying father, Leonard Langston, had made his final wish painfully clear. Marry her or I'll strip you of everything. Clara's presence in Leonard's life was a mystery Ethan hadn't cared enough to unravel. All he knew was she had earned his father's strange admiration after helping him once during a minor heart episode in a park, treating him like a man, not a tycoon. Leonard had been smitten by her humility. Ethan had only felt resentment. As vows were exchanged and the priest pronounced them man and wife, neither looked at the other. No kiss, just applause from strangers and a silent ride back to mansion. The wedding night began with distance. Ethan poured himself a glass of scotch in the dimly lit lounge while Clara stood by the window, still in her gown, clutching her sleeves. The silence between them was thick. He finally broke it. "You don't have to pretend," he said, not even turning to look at her. "We both know what this is." She turned her head slowly. "Then what is this, Ethan?" He flinched at the sound of his name in her soft voice. He had expected silence. Obedience, not questions. "This is business. You needed help. I needed a seat at the board. You were the pawn. That's all." She swallowed hard. "I agreed to marry you to save my grandmother, not to be humiliated." Ethan chuckled bitterly. "Don't flatter yourself. I don't even care enough to humiliate you." She flinched but didn't break. "I'm not asking for love," she said quietly. "Just respect." That word, it echoed inside Ethan more than he expected, because respect was something he rarely gave or received in his world. Without another word, Clara walked past him, her perfume trailing a soft trace of jasmine, and disappeared into the guest room, not the one they were supposed to share. It should have ended there, but something shifted. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Her words haunted him, not for their weight, but for their calmness. Clara hadn't begged. She hadn't cried. She had simply asked for human dignity in the face of a contract. He went to the library, seeking solace among books he hadn't touched in years. That's when he noticed something strange. A single book was placed oddly on the shelf, The Secret Garden. Curious, he pulled it down and found a letter tucked inside. It was addressed to him, in neat, rounded handwriting. "Dear Ethan, you don't know me well, and perhaps you never will. But I wanted you to know this marriage wasn't something I dreamed of. I've never cared about money or titles. But I cared deeply about my grandmother, and I know she would want me to try and make this work, with kindness. If you ever find yourself looking for peace, there's a bench in the East Garden under the cherry tree. I go there when the world becomes too loud. Maybe one day we'll sit there together, not as strangers, but as two people trying to understand each other. Clara, Ethan sat there frozen. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not in softness, not in sincerity. Most people wanted power from him. She was offering peace. Something inside him cracked. A memory, maybe, of his mother, who used to hum songs in the kitchen and laugh like rain. She had died when he was 10, and since then, warmth had been a myth. He folded the letter carefully and slid it into his coat pocket. The next morning, Ethan walked into the garden. He had barely ever noticed it, but there it was, just as she'd written. A lone cherry tree, and beneath it, an old stone bench. Clara was already there. She didn't hear him approach. She was feeding breadcrumbs to a small bird, whispering something with a half-smile on her lips. When she finally noticed him, she looked surprised, but didn't stand up. He joined her silently. A few minutes passed before he spoke. "You wrote the letter?" She nodded. "Did you think it was someone else?" "I wasn't sure anyone would ever write me something like that." Clara looked at him then. Really looked. Not at the CEO. Not at the billionaire. But at the man who had once been a little boy abandoned by affection. "I meant it," she said. "I'm not asking you to love me, but maybe just sit beside me sometimes." That moment, the simple act of sitting side by side, felt more intimate than a kiss. And for the first time since their wedding, Ethan felt something shift in the air. A thread, a start. Back inside the mansion, the staff began whispering. The cold CEO, the one who didn't care for anyone, had been seen walking with his bride, not out of obligation, but in silence, with a look on his face that suggested curiosity. But just as hope started blooming, a phone call came that evening. Ethan answered, expecting a board member. Instead, it was a voice he hadn't heard in years. "Ethan," the voice rasped. "It's Martin." His uncle, disgraced, exiled from the company for embezzlement, and now calling out of the blue. "I have something you need to know," Martin continued, "about your bride, about why your father really chose her." Ethan's blood ran cold, because beneath the calm of that new bond, a storm was waiting. The mansion felt colder after that call. Ethan stood alone in the study, the fireplace crackling behind him as Martin's words replayed in his mind. "Your father didn't just choose Clara because she helped him during a hard episode. That girl, she's connected to your past in a way you don't know yet. And if you don't start asking questions, someone else will." Ethan had ended the call without replying, the sharp edges of old memories slicing through his calm. Clara, sweet, quiet, graceful Clara. What was she hiding? But as quickly as suspicion rose in his heart, a flicker of guilt followed. She had done nothing wrong, at least not yet. And for the first time in years, Ethan was beginning to see life beyond his own walls. She had helped him feel something again, and he wasn't ready to throw that away. Still, he couldn't ignore the unease. He needed answers. That night, Clara sat curled up in the corner of the guest room, her sketchbook open on her lap. Drawing had always helped her cope with change, with grief. And tonight, she was sketching cherry blossoms, like the ones in the garden where Ethan had surprised her earlier. The way he sat beside her, the way he listened, it was as if something inside him had cracked. And she could feel it, that subtle shift in his tone, the absence of coldness. Clara touched the petals in her drawing gently. Could it be possible that this marriage, born from a transaction, was turning into something real? Just as she smiled softly to herself, a knock startled her. Ethan stood at the door. His eyes weren't cold, but they were searching. "Can we talk?" he asked. She nodded, setting her sketchbook aside. They sat across from each other in the quiet room. No music, no servants, just the ticking of the old grandfather clock. "I need to ask you something," Ethan said carefully, "and I want you to be honest." Clara's heartbeat quickened. "Of course. Did you know my father before the heart incident?" She blinked, confused. "What do you mean? Did you ever meet him before that day in the park?" Clara hesitated. Her fingers curled around the edge of her dress. "Yes," she said slowly, "but only once. A long time ago. I didn't think it mattered." Ethan's breath hitched. "When," he demanded. "I was a child," she whispered. My grandmother used to clean houses to survive. One of them was the old Langston Lake House. I went with her sometimes. Your father visited once. I spilled juice on him. I was terrified, but he laughed and told me I had fire in my eyes. Ethan leaned back, stunned. I remember that house, he said. I hated going there. Your father, he remembered me, Ethan, years later when I helped him in the park. He recognized me, said I was a girl who didn't flinch. He told me he wanted someone strong to stay by your side, someone who wouldn't be afraid of your walls. Ethan stared at her, unsure of what to feel. She wasn't lying. He could see it in her trembling hands, in the honesty of her voice. Still, his thoughts returned to Martin's cryptic warning. There's something else, he said. My uncle called. He said there's a deeper reason my father chose you. Clara stiffened. I don't know what that means, she said. I didn't even want this. I wanted to run, Ethan, but I couldn't let my grandmother suffer. She gave everything for me. I couldn't walk away from that. Her voice cracked, and she turned away, wiping a tear quickly. Ethan's heart twisted. In that moment, the shadows between them blurred. He saw her, not as a piece in his father's twisted puzzle, but as a woman carrying her own weight of sacrifice, just like he had, for years, carried the weight of legacy and loneliness. He crossed the room and sat beside her. I don't know what's real right now, he admitted, but I believe you. She looked at him, eyes wide and glassy, and then, for the first time since their wedding, he reached for her hand. It was gentle, hesitant, but warm. Over the next few days, something delicate began to bloom. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them became comfortable. Ethan joined Clara in the garden each morning. She started leaving cups of tea outside his office. They shared small stories, childhood memories, favorite books, silly habits. The mansion, once echoing with cold, began to feel like a home. Clara laughed one morning, really laughed, when Ethan clumsily tripped over the garden hose trying to help her water the plants. He laughed too. It startled them both. But just as the ice began to melt, shadows loomed once more. One evening, while Claire was out visiting her grandmother in the hospital, Ethan returned home to find a thick envelope waiting for him on his desk. No name, no address, just a wax seal he hadn't seen in years, his grandfather's. Inside were old photographs. One, in particular, made his stomach drop. It was a picture of a young Clara, maybe 10 years old, standing beside a woman. Behind them was the Langston Lake House, and next to the woman was his father. On the back, scrawled in ink, were the words, "Find the truth before it finds you." Ethan felt dizzy. He stared at the woman beside Clara. Something about her seemed eerily familiar, and then it hit him. The eyes. They were his mother's eyes. Ethan barely slept that night. A storm raged outside, wind lashing against the windows like fate pounding at the door. Who was that woman in the photo? Was it possible that Clara was connected to his mother's past? Why had no one ever mentioned this? He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to go. The next morning, Ethan showed up unannounced at the Langston family archives, hidden beneath the estate's old west wing. He hadn't stepped foot in there in over a decade. He opened drawer after drawer, sifting through documents, letters, wills, photographs. And then he found it, a journal, his mother's. He flipped through the pages, heart pounding, until he found a section dated just months before her death. There's a woman I met at the market today, Evelyn Monroe. She's younger than me, but strong. We talk for hours. There's something about her I admire. She reminds me of who I used to be before all of this, before Leonard turned cold. She is a little girl. Clara, beautiful, curious child. I wish Ethan had someone like her grow up with. Ethan's fingers trembled. Clara's mother knew his mother. They had been friends, and his mother had admired her. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the journal. The pieces were beginning to come together. But the full picture was still out of reach. Clara wasn't just a random girl who saved his father in a park. She was someone tied to his family's past, to a life Ethan had forgotten in the rush of corporate deals and inherited pain. He thought about Clara's kindness, her quiet strength, her ability to see through his walls without breaking them. Maybe his father hadn't chosen her out of manipulation. Maybe he had chosen her out of hope. But then why the secrecy? Why the cryptic letters? Why the photo? There was only one person left who might have the final answers: his grandmother. And she hadn't spoken to anyone in years. Not since his mother died. But now, Ethan had no choice. It was time to knock on a door long closed. Because the truth about Clara, about everything, was waiting. And whatever he discovered next, there would be no turning back. A year had passed. The mansion was no longer a shrine of cold marble and hollow luxury. It was filled with laughter, art, warmth, and the scent of homemade bread. Clara's paintings lined the walls. Ethan had started a new company, one that built homes for struggling families instead of luxury towers. They called it Haven House Company. It wasn't as big as Langston Corp., but it was theirs. They didn't have it all, but they had everything. Then came the letter. No envelope, no stamp, just one folded paper slid beneath the front door. Clara picked it up first. Her hands trembled as she read the words. The past is not dead. Look beneath the chapel. You'll find what Ethan was never told. She froze. The chapel? There was a small, unused stone building at the far end of the Langston estate, a place Ethan's mother used to visit before her death. It had been sealed for years. That night, when she showed it to Ethan, he turned pale. My father told me never to go there. But hand in hand, they went. They pried open the rusty lock and pushed through the heavy wooden door. Dust and decay greeted them. Old pews, broken windows, silence thick as fog. Then Ethan saw it, beneath the altar, a trapdoor. They opened it, and what they found changed everything. It was a journal, old, fragile, hidden beneath wooden floorboards. Ethan turned the yellowed pages, his mother's handwriting trembling on each one. And then they read it, page after page. Confessions, secrets, pain. She had never loved Langston Sr. She was in love with someone else, an artist, a kind man she met in Italy before her arranged marriage. That man was Clara's father. The wedding between Ethan's parents had been nothing but a transaction, a merger, and when she became pregnant, it hadn't been with Langston's child. Ethan wasn't a Langston by blood. He and Clara weren't strangers who married for business. They were always meant to find each other. They were always connected. And suddenly everything made sense. Why his father hated emotion. Why Clara's mother vanished. Why they were drawn to each other from the very beginning. They were the children of stolen love stories, heirs to silenced hearts. And now, they had a chance to rewrite it all. Ethan walked into the press conference the next day, not as a CEO, but as a man reclaiming truth. I am not a Langston by blood, he said, voice strong. And I no longer carry the weight of that name. Gasps echoed through the room. He continued, holding Clara's hand. I found love in a forced marriage, not because of business, but because fate knew what it was doing when we didn't. Clara smiled beside him, tears glistening. I stand here today not as a businessman, but as a son of love and a husband of hope. The audience rose. No one clapped at first, too stunned. Then came the applause, slow, steady rising. And across the world, people watched as a man broke the chains of legacy, lies, and greed just to choose love. Years later, a little girl with Ethan's eyes and Clara's smile would sit in that same chapel, now restored, flipping through that old journal. Daddy, she asked, is it true you were forced to marry Mommy? Ethan laughed, scooping her into his arms. It's true, sweetheart. Did you hate her? He looked at Clara, who stood by the window, painting the sunrise. No, he whispered, smiling. I think the moment I saw her on our wedding night, I finally found a love story I didn't even know I was searching for. Because sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come wrapped in endings we never wanted. And the greatest love stories are the ones we never saw coming. The Langston Estate's East Wing had remained closed for years. No one dared disturb the woman who once ruled it with grace and power. Eleanor Langston, Ethan's grandmother. After her daughter-in-law's death, Eleanor withdrew from public life, retreating into the old garden quarters with only books, silence, and a nurse by her side. But this time, the past had come knocking. Ethan stood before her door, heart pounding like he was a teenager again. He knocked twice. Silence. Then a creaking sound. The door opened slowly, revealing dim light, tall curtains, and the fragile frame of Eleanor sitting in a velvet chair. Her silver hair was neatly tied back. Her eyes, once sharp, now clouded with time, still carried the weight of knowing far too much. "You finally came," she said quietly, as if she had been waiting. Ethan stepped in, hesitant. "I need answers," he said simply. Eleanor nodded, motioning for him to sit. "Let me guess. You found the picture and your mother's journal." Ethan flinched. "You knew?" "I left them there," she whispered, "because I knew the day would come when the truth would find you, and I prayed you'd be ready." He sat uneasy. Who was Evelyn Monroe? Eleanor closed her eyes, a storm of memory flickering behind them. She was your mother's best friend. They met in a market in the lower districts. Two women from different worlds, both craving kindness. Evelyn wasn't a maid. Ethan, she was a writer, a beautiful soul. But life didn't treat her kindly. She paused. Your mother loved her like a sister. I remember the way she'd talk about Evelyn and her little girl. Clara said she had more light in her than any child she'd ever seen. Ethan's mouth went dry. Clara, is that Clara? Eleanor nodded. Yes, Evelyn's daughter, Clara Monroe. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. But why didn't anyone tell me? Because after your mother died, Eleanor said, voice breaking, your father did what he always did. He erased everything that didn't fit into his world of control. He sent Evelyn away, paid her to disappear. He was afraid Clara would be a reminder of what your mother used to be before him, before the Langston name swallowed her light. Ethan's hands clenched. He destroyed them. He tried. Eleanor said softly, but your father forgot one thing. Memories live in the people we love. Evelyn never stopped writing. Clara grew up reading her mother's stories, and one of those stories was about you. Ethan looked up, stunned. What? She remembered you. Eleanor said, your mother once took you to meet Clara. You were both 6. You played in the gardens. Clara told her mother that day, I want to marry the boy who gave me the blue flower. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He didn't remember it, but deep down, something stirred. A flash of blue, a girl's laughter. Eleanor smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. You gave her forget-me-not, Ethan, the only flower your mother grew in secret. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in the garden where Clara often painted. The moonlight bathed everything in silver. The silence wasn't cold tonight. It was sacred. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of lavender and old stories. So this was the truth. His marriage wasn't manipulation. It was destiny, delayed. And Clara, sweet, gentle Clara, had known more about him than he ever guessed. Not out of calculation, but out of memory, out of quiet love passed down from a mother who believed in a forgotten little boy with a blue flower in his hand. Clara returned from the hospital late that evening, weary but smiling. Her grandmother's health was improving. As she stepped into the mansion, she found Ethan sitting in the garden, waiting. She paused. Something about him looked different. Softer, sadder, but peaceful. He stood when he saw her. I know who you are, he said. Clara froze. What? I know about your mother, Evelyn. Her eyes widened. She looked ready to run. But then Ethan reached into his coat and pulled something from his pocket. A dried forget-me-not. I gave this to you once. I didn't remember until now. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes. She brought a hand to her mouth. My mother told me stories, she whispered, about the boy who gave flowers instead of fists. She always said one day we'd meet again. Ethan stepped closer. I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner. You see me now, Clara said, voice shaking. And then no audience, no vows, no force. They embraced, not as strangers in a forced marriage, but as two souls who had once shared a garden, a flower, and a silent promise. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel broken. He felt found. And Clara, the girl who had once drawn in corners and served coffee with trembling hands, felt safe, finally safe. They stood beneath the stars, two hearts echoing across time. And somewhere, in another world, Evelyn and Ethan's mother were smiling. Weeks had passed since Ethan and Clara's quiet embrace under the stars. And yet, everything had changed. It wasn't sudden, not like thunder in the sky. It was slow like sunrise, every morning. Ethan found himself waking earlier, hoping to hear the gentle hum of Clara in the kitchen or the sound of her brushes dancing on a canvas. He was no longer the cold, distant CEO who lived behind steel walls. He was a man rediscovering warmth in a home he'd once found suffocating. But love, true love, always arrives with a choice. And Ethan was about to face his. The Langston boardroom was colder than usual that morning. Rows of gray suits sat stiffly as Mr. Robert Kincaid, the family lawyer and longtime puppet master behind many Langston decisions, stood at the head of the table, a thin smile on his face. "We need to talk about your marriage," Kincaid said smoothly, "and the prenup." Ethan leaned back, his eyes steady. "What about it?" "The clause," Kincaid replied, sliding a file across the table, "states that if you divorce before 1 year, Langston Corporation gains full control over all charitable assets under your name, including the Evelyn Foundation." Ethan narrowed his eyes. That foundation, named for Clara's mother, was something he'd quietly begun building after learning the full story. He had moved millions of his personal shares into it. He wanted to fund scholarships for young girls like Clara, build art centers, and support single mothers trying to make it in a world that didn't care. "It's not a clause I wrote," Ethan said. "That was my father's doing." Kincaid gave a cold chuckle. "Your father thought ahead. He knew emotions could make you reckless. But the clause stands. If your marriage becomes more than contractual, if you admit love, then you risk everything." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So if I love her, I lose everything?" Kincaid tapped the table. "Business is about sacrifice, Ethan. Langston's legacy isn't built on emotion." The room grew silent. Ethan stood, slow and deliberate. He looked around the room at the men who had dictated his life for years, who had forced his mother to smile through grief, and now wanted him to do the same. He was done playing their game. Clara didn't ask questions when she found Ethan packing boxes later that night. He didn't speak much, but his eyes looked heavy, like he had fought 100 silent battles. "Are you going somewhere?" she finally asked. He paused, holding her gaze. "I'm walking away from the company." Her breath caught. "Why?" Ethan stepped closer. "Because I spent my whole life building towers of glass and marble, and not one of them ever felt like home." He gently took her hand. "You did." Clara felt her heart clench. "But the foundation, your future." "I'll start again," he said. "This time with truth, with freedom. With you if you'll still have me." Clara stared at him, tears welling. For so long, she had lived in the shadows of his world. And now, he was choosing to burn it down for her. She didn't speak. She simply walked over to the boxes and helped him pack. That night, they didn't sleep in the master suite filled with gold and stone. They slept on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by half-sealed boxes, old memories, and a brand-new future. The next morning, the world woke to news that shocked every headline. Ethan Langston steps down, declares love over legacy. The internet erupted. Stock markets panicked. But amidst the chaos, the Evelyn Foundation page crashed from overwhelming donations. Thousands of women wrote letters, sharing how Clara's story had changed their lives. And somewhere in the background, away from noise and judgment, Ethan and Clara stood together under the same garden tree where they had once played as children. Ethan pulled out a tiny blue flower from behind his back. "I found this again," he whispered. "It's still my favorite." Clara laughed through her tears. "Mine, too." He knelt, not with a ring, not with diamonds, but with the same sincerity he had as a child. "I didn't fall in love on our wedding night, Clara. I just finally remember what love had always looked like." She knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his. "I didn't marry a CO, Ethan. I married the boy who gave me a forget-me-not and told me I was seen." And beneath the blooming spring sky, they kissed, no longer strangers trapped in a marriage of power, but soulmates reunited after a lifetime of silence. Yet even love needs its own trials, because the past wasn't finished with them just yet, and someone from Ethan's father's circle had been watching them closely, planning something that would shatter their peace, something that would test just how strong their love really was.